All right. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us at our 13th Salem Literary Festival. My name's Amber Sanchez, and I'm a senior at Salem Academy. I'm very excited to introduce this session, an author at the festival with the Developing Mystery in YA for this year's Lit Fest. Before I introduce our authors, I want to give you a quick overview of how this will work. We've pasted our anti-harassment policy at the top of the chat, so you know the rules up front. We don't anticipate any problems, but we also want you to know how important it is that everybody feels safe. So most of you are Zoom experts by this point, so just a few quick tips. Please put your questions in the Q&A, and we'll do our best to answer them after the conversation. Any extra comments can be put in the chat, and if you'd like to use closed captions, you just go to the bottom of the screen, press CC. And now, to introduce our guest, Kathleen Glasgow is the New York Times bestselling author of Girl in Pieces, You'd Be Home Now, How to Make Friends with the Dark, and The Agathas with Liz Lawson. Her books have been published in more than 24 countries. Next, we have Jennifer Lynn Barnes, who is the #1 New York. Hello. Next is Jennifer Lynn Barnes, who is the #1 New York Times bestselling author of more than 20 acclaimed young adult novels, including the Inheritance Games series, Little White Lies, Deadly Little Scandals, The Lovely and the Lost, and the Natural series. Jen is a Fulbright scholar with advanced degrees in psychology, psychiatry, and cognitive science. She received her PhD from Yale University in 2012, and for many years was a professor of psychology and professional writing. You can find her online at jenniferlynnbarnes.com or follow her Twitter at @JenLynnBarnes. Let's see if she's going to pop in.
Hello, I'm here.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see you on the screen.
Yes, I'm here. Hello, everyone.
And next is Kate Alice Marshall, who is the author of young adult and middle grade novels, including I Am Still Alive, Rules for Vanishing, 13, and These Fleeting Shadows. She lives outside of Seattle with her husband, 2 dogs named Vonnegut and Octavia, and 2 kids, and they all conspire to keep her on her toes. And then our moderator, Liz Lawson, is the New York Times bestselling author of The Agathas, co-written with New York Times bestselling author Kathleen Glasgow. And she's also the author of The Lucky Ones, a Kirkus Review's best book of 2020. She lives outside of Washington, D.C. with her family and 2 bratty cats. All right. So welcome, everyone. We're all looking forward to having your conversation. Over to you, Liz.
Hi, everyone. I'm Liz Lawson. Thanks so much for the introductions, Amber. That was lovely. We will be chatting today about developing mysteries, particularly YA mysteries. And I'm joined by some amazing authors. We're just waiting on Kathleen. She should be with us any moment. But in the meantime, because I can actually answer some of the questions for Kathleen and myself, which is helpful, we will start. So my first question for you all is, what inspired you to write your stories? Kathleen, hello. Your hair looks lovely. Hello.
Hi everyone.
Hi.
Hey, everyone.
So we were just beginning, and I said, the first question I have for everyone is, what inspired you to write your story? Would anyone like to begin?
I think Jen should begin because she has the newest book out.
That is very true.
Okay.
It's the #1 New York Times bestseller.
Thank you. I'm very excited. So my newest book's The Final Gambit, which is book 3 in the Inheritance Games series, which is this mystery series about an eccentric, puzzle-obsessed billionaire who dies and leaves his entire fortune to a teenage girl he's never met. She has no idea why, because he's a total stranger. But to inherit, she has to move into a sprawling, secret passage-filled mansion and live alongside the family he just disinherited, which includes his 4 very attractive grandsons. And the initial inspiration, the first part of the book I had, long before I had the plot, was the house. So this mansion is like 40,000 square foot, closer to a castle than a mansion house, full of secret passages. It was actually inspired by the fact that my dad, my senior year in college, retired. And as his like post-retirement project, he started designing his and my mom's dream house. And he wasn't an architect or anything, but he bought Google SketchUp and just started drawing out rooms, and then worked with an architect to actually like formalize the plans. And then he was involved in every stage of the design process. Like he helped design every like custom cabinet in the house. Like he designed, picked out every doorknob, everything. The house took like years to build, and he would walk the construction site every single day.
Oh, that's so cool.
And he asked me and my brother, is there anything you want in the house? And I said, yes, please, a secret passage. And so he built me a secret passage. It's in the library. There's a hidden button, and a bookshelf disappears into the wall, revealing a secret door. I just remember the first time I stepped into the house, I was like, oh my gosh, I can feel my dad in this house. Like this house is my dad. It was such a passion project. And I thought, oh my gosh, someday he's going to be gone and I'm going to have to sell this house. And I started getting like really emotional. But then my writer brain clicked on and said, what if it wasn't just a house? What if it was a 40,000 square foot mansion? And what if there wasn't just one secret passage? What if there were dozens? And what if it wasn't just that the person had put himself into the house metaphorically, but what if the person who built this 40,000 square foot house full of secret passages had built puzzles and riddles and codes and messages into the very design of the house? So I called it my puzzle house, and I had it for 10 years before I actually found the premise to go with it.
Wow.
Which was this: someone leaves her money and she has to move into his puzzle house.
That is so cool. What a great inspiration too. And how nice for your dad to know that he's the person who kind of inspired these books. That's really great.
I got to hear that story for the first time at an event the other day that he came to.
So
and
nice.
I was like, oh, and he's in the back of the room, and he kind of blushed. And
I love that. That's awesome. Kate, do you want to go next?
Sure. It's hard to follow that absolutely wonderful story of inspiration, but my most recent book is These Fleeting Shadows, which is also about kind of an odd inheritance. And a young woman whose estranged grandfather leaves his fortune to her on the condition that she isn't allowed to leave the grounds of the family estate for a full year. And various supernatural happenings start to occur right away. And I think on some level, I was writing this during the pandemic, and there was definitely a part of me that was just dwelling a little too much on not being able to leave my own house. So that was in the mix. But I've been working on a second book that has some of the same sources of inspiration around the idea of what ghost stories represent to us. I'm really interested in ghost stories as someone who doesn't believe in ghosts at all, in terms of what they are in our consciousness and what they mean to us personally, and why we create ghost stories as societies. And so both of these books have been teasing out sort of different ideas about what is a ghost. And in These Fleeting Shadows, it's not a ghost story. That's not what's going on in the house, but it's a haunted house that isn't haunted by ghosts. It's haunted by, among other things, the bad deeds of this family. And Helen, the main character, has to both uncover them and solve that mystery and grapple with what her family has done and what that means for her. And so I was really inspired by the idea of ghost stories as mysteries and trying to piece together a history and a life that isn't there anymore, but is still echoing into the present.
That's awesome. I love that. And it was funny to me when I was reading both of your books, how the premise is so similar, but you took them in that similar premise in like completely different directions in both books. It's really a fascinating look at how an idea can be one thing, but like it can turn into a totally different thing once you start fleshing it out. And Kathleen, what inspired us to write the Agathas?
The Agathas. I would say that desperation, loneliness, fear, and panic inspired us to write the books together. Because Liz's first book had just come out, her beautiful debut book, The Lucky Ones, and then everything shut down.
The lucky one. Yes,
So all her big plans went out the window.
that is very true.
And we were all locked in, and she and I had met before, and we texted and we were friends. And we just decided one day, what if we wrote something that was completely different than our normal contemporary realistic novels that generally were very sad. We were like, what if we wrote something fun? And Liz loves Agatha Christie and I love true crime. And because there were two of us, which is awesome, everyone should have a co-writer. We just decided to noodle around and create two characters, Alice and Iris, who are from very different backgrounds, who team up to solve a mystery in their seaside town of Castle Cove. And we started trading texts about it, and we outlined it because Liz knows you need to outline a mystery first. You can't just be a pantser like I normally am.
I'm still learning that you need to outline.
Liz can correct me if I'm wrong, but we outlined everything beforehand, and then we started writing it. It's a dual POV book. So Liz is Alice and I'm Iris, and we wrote their biographies. And we wrote really quickly because I think that you have to, if you're going to co-write, you can't really labor over sentences. And we would trade, like she would send me a chapter, and then the next day or later that night, I would send her my responding Iris chapter, and we would follow the outline. And so we wrote very quickly, and it was a lot of fun. And I think that overall, and Liz can correct me if I'm wrong, we really wanted this to be kind of an adventure of sorts with two girls who come together and learn how to be friends, even though they bicker and banter all the time and they come from completely different backgrounds. It's a friendship story wrapped in a mystery. Or maybe it's a mystery wrapped in a friendship story. And we wanted them to have an adventure and not necessarily be good at their jobs, because what 16 and 17-year-olds actually know, I mean, some do probably know how to solve a mystery, but they're learning on the fly. And they do a lot of things that are ethically flexible, but it's all for the greater good. And we had a great time thinking up Castle Cove and Alice's backstory and Iris's backstory. And we had a great time thinking about what the mystery would be. And then I would be the bad co-writer every once in a while, where 3 days before a deadline, I would say, oh, hey, Liz, I was listening to this story on the radio about like this grandmother who paid her least favorite grandson to take the murder rap for her favorite grandson. And then she would pay him like a lot of money anyway. And Liz would be like, oh my God. And then suddenly we would have like another twist or turn in the book. And then we finished it and we were, very excited. And I was like, oh, that was fun. Let's go back to writing our sad books. But Liz had another thing in mind. And that's when I found out exactly how devious Liz was. She had already told her agent, and her agent loved it. And things like snowballed from there.
That's true. I'm so sorry, Kathleen.
Yeah.
So sorry. I forced you to finish that book with me. But what you said sort of leads into my next question when you mentioned how we did really plot the book out in advance, because otherwise I think it would have been so difficult to write a mystery without plotting, in my opinion. But I know that some people, I've read interviews with the mystery writer Tana French, who says she does not plot. And I am like, your books are amazing. How do you write them then?
I think because hers are so character driven.
They are very character driven, but it's still amazing. I mean, I read one interview, anyway, that's a side point, but it's amazing to me that she does not. Does everyone else plot their mysteries out? I mean, Jen, yours are so, you had a trilogy. There were things in the first book that led into things in the third. I mean, I imagine you had to have a very detailed plot.
So I do and I don't plot. So I do a lot of pre-writing where I figure stuff out. And it's less, this is going to happen, then this is going to happen, then this is going to happen. It's more, I use what I call the 3 mysteries method, or the 3 questions method, which I just started using around the time I wrote my debutante series, which is basically, I say, I don't write mystery singular book, I write mysteries plural. So the first thing I decide for a book is, what are the 3 mysteries going to be? So I brainstorm all these possible questions, and then I'll select 3 that I think work together. So for the first inheritance schemes book, it's, why did the old man leave her the money? What happened a year before the book started that split 2 of the brothers apart, where Jameson and Grayson aren't really talking anymore, and they have some hidden past trauma that we're going to uncover. And the third one's, what member of the Hawthorne family wants Avery dead? So I'll find 3 questions, and then I spend a few days, and all I do is, like, I have a handwritten journal where I brainstorm possible answers. And I'm like, is it this? Is it this? Is it this? Is it this? And I'll do that for all 3 questions, and then I'll select 3 answers that I think will work well with each other. But the nice thing about doing it that way is then I've also kind of organically created a bunch of red herrings and alternative interpretations that I can write towards too. So I know the questions and I know the answers, but how we're going to get from the questions to the answers, I don't necessarily plan out in advance. The one other thing I do plan out in advance for these books is, the old guy was obsessed with puzzles and riddles and games. So there's always like a puzzle sequence where you have to solve one clue to get to the next, almost like a treasure hunt or something. And I do plan out the puzzle sequences in advance. That usually takes like a day, maybe 2, to sit down and build all the puzzles. So I have the puzzles they're going to solve. I have the questions I'm throwing up at the beginning, the answers I'm getting at the end. But how I get from A to B is usually more improvised. And a lot of the twists along the way aren't necessarily planned out. It's more, I discover them. I don't discover them the second I'm writing them. I may discover it 100 pages before it happens. So I've written something and then I'm like, ooh, that sentence I just wrote, what if that meant this? Or I noticed this character just said this, maybe that's this. And so, or like I discovered a ton of stuff that was going to happen in book 3 when I wrote books 1 and 2. So it was less, I planned it out before I wrote book 1. But by the time I'd written books 1 and 2, I had discovered almost all of book 3. Because there are lots of clues through there. So it'll be like, I'll know the 3 mysteries, I'll have those answers, but the twists and turns and some of the unresolved clues from the first 2 books, the clues are often things that happened. And then I'm like, oh, this seems like it means this. So I love reading it as a reader. And then like, if you're a reader, you make up all these theories about what's going on. And so I read back over what I've written and I theorize, and then I kind of go from there.
That is really cool. That's fascinating. Because I had wondered when I was reading your books, like whether you had this like huge, like a fantasy writer, you know, this huge flow chart of like everything that was going to happen in the 3 books. I love hearing that it is kind of, you're kind of a, you know, in between a plotter and a plant star, as they say. Kate, how about you?
Jennifer's process sounds very similar to my own. I love the idea of having those 3 questions formally at the beginning. I might steal that because it's basically what I do, but in a much messier fashion. I also have many journals full of handwritten notes where I do tons and tons of pre-writing when I'm first developing a mystery. And I also like to find those places where the multiple questions are intersecting with each other and can reveal and obscure each other as you delve into each one. For me, when I'm writing, I try to outline every time and then remember that I fail every time. So I like to think of it for myself as the metaphor I use is looking down a road at night and I can see streetlights here and there. So I know where I'm going, but I have no idea what lies in between. And so I create milestones for myself. And they're often particular turns or reveals or scenes that I know that I'm writing toward. So it will be a particular argument or, you know, someone getting killed, the discovery of a major clue that I know is going to be very satisfying. But they're the ones that I feel the most, not just the ones that I know that like mechanically and procedurally need to be in the book. Because if it's just something that I think is going to need to happen to make the book work, it's much more likely to change as I go along. But if it's something where it has an emotional beat in it or a really cool reveal that I just instantly love. I know that I'm going to find a way to keep that in the book and bend everything else around it. So those are the ones that I stake out along the way. And I let myself then kind of wander in the darkness in between and find the little bits that I didn't think of ahead of time, and the odd little, track through the bush to get off trail, but in a fun way. And so that's how I sort of let myself run wild a little bit and discover things as I go without getting completely lost, because especially I also don't quite comprehend going completely blind and writing without an outline with a mystery, because there's so much going on that I learned very quickly. I need to actually at least have the idea of where I'm heading.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. It's almost terrifying to me to think of writing a mystery without having at least like a skeleton of a plot, which I think is what we kind of had, right, Kathleen? We didn't have that thing that my husband always tells me to do, because he's a screenwriter, which is to plot out each scene, like, and flesh it out and write like a paragraph. We were more like, it was a little vague. We kind of knew what was happening in each chapter, but we were very flexible with where we were going.
Yeah, we were flexible. But listening to Jen and Kate, it sounds so professional, and like I wanted to take notes, like so that I could know, so we could write like even better mystery the next time around. Because I'm like, oh, 3 questions, that sounds good. And then like Kate talking about like looking down the road, and I'm like, Jesus, Liz and I are like the jackass crew of like mystery writers, where I'm like, oh, Liz, I wrote this chapter, by the way, they're gonna fall through this like treehouse and Alice is gonna like break her chin. And we're like doing these horrible things to them, and it's real buffoonery. And gosh, Liz, we need to really become professional here.
I know. We need to step it up, Kathleen.
Yeah. And it's like when we're co-writing and we have our outline and we stick to it, so we know what has to happen in the next chapter, but there is flexibility, because in terms of character, because we have to have that, because it is that friendship story, and we also have to do that subplot of them like getting closer or having fights or learning things about each other, in addition to learning things about the mystery. But we have flexibility, and sometimes we have our tiffs. And once Liz and I had a tiff that was like a day and a half or something about a plot point, and then she sent me her Alice chapter, and Alice had thrown a phone at Iris's head, and I thought, oh, Liz is not quite over that tiff yet. So in my chapter I had Iris make sure that Alice got hurt somehow, and then we worked it out and it was all fine. And those things get reflected in the writing. And then we notice things. Like Liz is very good at noticing things as we go along. Like, Kathleen, we haven't addressed this gaping hole that was created because you said we should do this. And I'm like, oh no, maybe we should just take that out. She's like, we can't take it out now. And so
Kathleen's like, oh, it's cool. They're like, the vibes of it are in there. You're like all about the vibes. You're like, they just like figured it out because of the vibes. But you're very creative, which is, I think we balance each other very well in that aspect.
But we do outline, and we stick to it. But we have to be flexible, because we're co-writing.
Yes.
So things happen.
That is very true. What do you think the hardest moment was when we were writing the Agathas?
It was that moment that I learned that you are really like a mystery character yourself, because you held back that information of having told your agent that we were writing this book from me.
That was really the hardest moment for you.
For as long as possible. And then I realized how truly devious that you actually were in real life. And I'm like,
that's right.
Because as soon as we had the contract over our heads, I was like, oh, this isn't fun anymore. Because we were having so much fun. We felt very free.
I know.
As writers, I know that Kate and Jen can understand that sometimes things don't seem as free when you're writing because you have to.
That is very true. That is very true.
So
how about for you two? What do you think the hardest moment was while you were writing your book or books?
So for the final gambit, it was like a 3-week period that was really hard. It was the line edits. So it was right before we had like a drop dead date to go to copy edits. So there was no extra room in it because there weren't advanced copies for this one. So it was copy edits to hit our printer date. And it was last spring, and my daycare kept shutting down because kids in the daycare kept getting COVID. So we kept having like kids home for quarantines, and I had a 12-month-old who needed like constant supervision. So it was a really condensed timeline. And in addition to doing line edits, my editor had said, what if there was one more puzzle in there? Like one more something. And then there were several other problems she'd found too. So I was like, I'm a big fan of finding like one solution to 5 different problems so that you can kind of kill a lot of birds with one stone. And I was like, okay, I knew where it needed to go. I knew it needed to do like 3 different things emotionally for 3 different characters. It needed to up the plot. It needed to up the stakes early on. So like I had a list of like 12 things that I had to do with one additional puzzle. And I didn't really have any extra. It needed to happen in the same space that was already there. And I also needed to hit like 5 emotional moments that were in there that couldn't change. And so like I figured out how to do it, but then the fix I made would have changed her perspective on everything, just the emotional nuance of what, because it was upping the stakes earlier. So that means the emotional reaction to each subsequent thing. So then I had to go through and like finesse like the next like 50 or 60 pages until the stakes were upped in the old version to have that. But I couldn't mess with anything because these books are such intricate puzzles that like I had to keep all of the pieces of the mystery of the puzzle of the love triangle of everything that was in there had to stay in there. I just had to lay all of this other stuff in. And I was doing it like while children were literally crawling all over me. And it was not a good time. I cried like every day for 3 weeks while trying to nail this. And then when it finally clicked, I was like, yes, like I knew it was right. I wasn't questioning it once it got there, but it was like an excessive amount of time where I felt like I was banging my head against a wall and I wasn't sure if the wall was going to crumble away or not. And then eventually it did.
Yeah, that is very stressful. As someone who also I have only one kid, but it's still, when he's at home, writing is like impossible. And Kate, how about you?
I mean, I'll be totally honest that there are big chunks of this book that I barely remember writing because of when it was, and because, you know, I also have 2 small children, and there was so much happening during that stretch, and so many different things pulling at me. And so I think the hardest part of writing this book was just staying in it and finding the space to enter the character's mindset as fully as I needed to. And it was, I feel like every one of my books, I've been putting more of myself into and becoming more emotionally entangled with as I go. It was something where early on in my writing, I kept myself at a big remove from my writing, whether just because of the style of my prose or because I didn't want to be vulnerable in that way. And so with each one, I've sort of like put more of my soul into it. And so with this one, it was the hardest to write just on a practical level, but it had the most of myself in it. And so there was a sort of agonizing pull between where my brain and my heart and my soul could be at any given moment, and just being able to pour myself into, especially the emotional climax of the book, enough to really pull that together with all of there are a lot of moving pieces at the end with, practical mysteries and all of the world building of the supernatural side of things. And everything needs to line up and everything needs to be layered on top of itself. And so it wasn't something that I could be in halfway and get done and make it work at all. So just finding the space to belong to the book completely, I think, was the hardest part of this one. But I did, and I feel very, very invested in the ending of that book.
Yeah, it can be very hard because your book is dark, and like writing dark books, it takes something, like it takes a special part of you, I think, to be able to do that.
Especially when Blue's Clues is blasting in the
Oh,
background.
You're like, this does not fit together. Who would you say your favorite secondary character is in your book? Kate, do you want to go first this time?
Sure. I've fallen in love with most of my secondary characters at various points. So I'm just going to kind of pick one who I really enjoyed writing, which was, and he's a very secondary character, but the main character's stepfather, Simon, who is there to basically just be like everything she needs. So he's like this dad joke, hokey, just like very sweet and supportive guy who doesn't have a mean bone in his body. And that's his whole job in the book. And it was really, really nice just to spend like a few lines at a time with him. And, people are getting like dismembered and hung from trees in the background, but Simon's a good guy and we're going to go get a hug.
It's funny, when I started the book and I met Simon, I thought he might turn out to be bad because he was so good. But it was like really nice that he didn't,
I knew that was entirely a possibility. And I was like, should I change him at all to lean into that or out of it? I was like, no, he's just going to be Simon and It'll be fun no matter how people interpret him.
Yeah, no, it was great. I liked him too. Jen, how about you?
My favorite is the youngest of the four Hawthorne brothers, who's Xander Hawthorne, he's the one who describes himself as a human Rube Goldberg machine, which is one of those really complicated machines that does a simple thing in a complicated way. So he's the one who thinks very out of the box. And he's always building robots and accidentally exploding stuff. And he's also, because he's not a part of like the love triangle that's going on, the other two teenage brothers are part of the love triangle. So every interaction with them is very loaded. And like every moment with them is very like emotionally taut. And there's lots of stuff going on. And then Xander is Avery's friend. So she kind of does from Avery what you were talking about Simon doing, where like Xander is just her uncomplicated, good friend who's just kind of pure and funny. And as a writer, he comes onto the scene. He gets a lot of the comic relief dialogue because he's like hilarious. And like if Xander's in a scene, it's going to be easy to write. If it's not Xander and it's any one of the others, it's going to be much, much harder to write. So I think my affection for him is both like as the person he is, but also for the fact that if it's a Xander scene, it's going to be like twice as quick to write as a scene with any of the other brothers.
Yeah, I can understand that. The characters that are easy to write I feel like I don't know, they tend to be favorites. Kathleen, who is your favorite secondary character?
Well, it's Cole Fielding.
Of course.
The hot background love interest who plays a big part in the book. But you didn't want to add Cole, and I wedged Cole in there and made him integral to the plot when Liz wasn't looking, so that she couldn't have Cole Fielding, so that we could not have Cole Fielding. But Liz, I really enjoyed when we were writing Coach.
Coach?
Yeah,
Coach?
I've been thinking about Coach more and more, and he's the stepfather of Brooke Donovan, and we had started out with him like one way, and then halfway through we gave him like another dimension, and I really love that we did that and what we did with him, and that we went a little bonkers with it.
We did, but it was fun.
Yes, and so I think he was a lot of fun to write and to add that twist to him.
Mm-hmm.
And Ricky Randall, the morally flexible lawyer who used to be Iris's babysitter, I had a lot of fun with that, and the whole sort of drunken, messy lawyer stereotype, who also is a mentor to Alice and Iris, so I enjoyed that part a lot.
Yeah, Ricky is a great character.
Writing?
Well, he got his character was not, it was edited down in book one, although he's in book two more, but Raph is I love Raph. He's just fun to write. He and Alice have like will they, won't they? They won't
But
until
they can't.
exactly. They won't for at least a year. But they, you know, they have this will they, won't they kind of thing. And he's kind of like her moral compass almost, I feel like. And I just think he brings a little bit of like heart. He brings a little heart to her that she, you know, she's a little cold sometimes. So he balances that well. Yeah. We have, I think, time for maybe like one more question. So let's see. What did you guys do any research for your book without, you know, giving any spoilers away that you found particularly interesting that you can share?
I spend tons and tons of time on real estate sites, like being like, Zillow, show me everything that costs over $10 million or over $20 million. And just looking at the different rooms people put in houses and the different features that the sites will do. And then I also spend a lot of time just doing an internet search for most expensive fill in the blank in the world, and see what comes up, because we're talking about a family that has like $42 billion. And no matter what you insert in there, you get some really interesting articles. You can be like most expensive lawn furniture in the world. And then you'll get this like really ridiculous article about like the 5 pieces of lawn furniture that cost over $1 million each or something. And like, I haven't actually done that one, but you can do that for this one. I did most expensive chess sets in the world to find out different things. And I do that for a bunch of different stuff. And then in every book, you see new rooms in Hawthorne House that you haven't seen before, because the thing in the book is that the old billionaire never stopped building the house. He built this huge mansion, and then he added on a new room or wing every year. So when I'm going to a new place in the house that we haven't seen before, I do a lot of that, like looking up online to see what the different rooms can be. And then once I have a name for the room, then I look up a bunch of different examples for that room, and then I kind of build it out. So that's probably where I end up doing the most research.
That's fun research. Looking at real estate websites is like, it's just very soothing almost. Kate, how about you?
I did a lot of research, way more than I could possibly use into 19th century occultism, because that's the origin of the family. They're sort of uncovering how the house was built and founded, which was in the late 19th century. And so, I mean, there's just so much wild stuff when you dig back into that, and lots of different sort of rabbit holes of the pseudo-scientific approach to occultism, where they were really quite sure that they were proving something. And so I read a bunch about these mediums and psychics who believed that they could project themselves through space, through geographic space, and see from afar, and that like as actual like spectral bodies, and that it became entwined with the lost Arctic expedition of the Erebus and the Terror that were lost trying to find the Northwest Passage. And there was a huge uproar about finding them, and many expeditions sent to go try to discover what had happened to them. And there were a number of people who claimed to be like sending themselves psychically up to the Arctic. And there were like jokes in newspapers about all of these people's spectral ghosts running into each other in the Arctic, because there were so many people who were claiming to have seen things and be wandering in the skies. And that I took like a tiny little sliver of all of that reading that I did and put it into the book. And the original draft had a lot more little asides about that and other oddities of the time, but there really wasn't room for it because it's not set in the 19th century. It's set now. So it's just, I took the flavor of it.
That's so cool. That's like a Wikipedia hole I could go down for like days. I feel like that's really neat. And Kathleen, like, what do you think that we researched that was really interesting? We did, I mean, you did a lot of true crime.
For the Agathas, we, there was that one of the plot points in Agatha's, how Brooke dies, came from an actual crime that happened in real life. So we researched that. Remember, we researched body decomposition, like what happens. And I had that friend, my doctor friend, who would help us with that. And you consulted with a lot of lawyers about legal things for that one. And I would say that we did like a fair amount of research too for the book 2, The Night in Question, because we're dealing with a mystery that they're solving that takes place in the 40s. And so we had to look up a lot of things about old Hollywood. And I have a lot of biographies of Hollywood actors from the 30s, 40s, and 50s, which helped. And I like to go to this antique store that has old Hollywood movie magazine. So that helped me when we were writing the portions of The Night in Question that are supposed to be little puff pieces from those magazines at that time. And we had to research like Hollywood and what was the name of a famous nightclub that like Levy would have met Mona Moody in at that time, the Mocambo, and how would they have met? What would she have been, like a cigarette girl? So we had a lot of fun, but we also did a lot of research into Hearst Castle, because since we based Levy Castle on Hearst Castle and Charles Levy on William Randolph Hearst, we did quite a bit of research into what Hearst Castle looked like and how we were going to design it. And you did a lot of room design, like what would be in the rooms and what kind of art would be on the walls. And for The Night in Question, I really enjoyed looking up like what is one of the world's most expensive chandeliers, because they would be hanging in the ballroom at the castle during this dance. And of course, Iris would notice it. And like how much, if Alice is stealing that expensive dress from the dress room in the castle, and it used to be Mona Moody's, and you said it was a Dior, like how much was a 1948 Dior ball gown? And we incorporated that into the plot, because it's like, you have to give back that $20,000 dress, Alice.
She's never giving it back.
I know, right? Because it's worth $20,000 now. And so we do a lot of fun research. And it is, when you know people who are knowledgeable about things that you're not necessarily knowledgeable about, and you don't want to Google them, like if you have lawyer friends or you have like doctor friends, like they're invaluable and you can thank them in the acknowledgements. Or name,
which is very nice to do. Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. So how do you let's see, I'm looking at how much time we have and seeing, okay, what drew you? Oh, here we go.
I don't want to interrupt.
No, that's okay.
If you're ready for the Q&A, we can get that started.
Absolutely.
So we have one question in the Q&A for Liz and Kathleen, and it says, is Castle Cove a nod to Murder, She Wrote by any chance?
Not on purpose.
Not on purpose. We wanted an atmospheric town. We talked about that because, we were sort of thinking about this book as partly Big Little Lies because of the domestic issues that are in the book with Alice and Iris and the hierarchy of class in the town. And, a seaside town, there's a lot of atmosphere there. We originally named the town something else, but then my son let me know that was the name of the town that the Scooby-Doo characters live in, and we should really, and even our editor hadn't caught that.
That was a big bummer because I really like the name. Well, I like both names, honestly, but it was a good catch by him.
Yeah, so we had to, so it's not necessarily a nod to Murder, She Wrote.
All right. I have a question for you guys. So personally, I believe that some of the best books with the most charm are written by two people. So for our co-authors in the room, what do you believe is the biggest strength and the biggest weakness of writing with another person?
Well, I think the biggest strength is that you constantly have that support of someone who is absolutely in the moment with you. Whereas when you're writing by yourself, sometimes you get so interior, you might not have, you're doing it all yourself. And so that can sometimes get a little overwhelming. But when you're actually with someone who's in the story with you, like Liz and I were, you're texting all the time. You can be frustrated together. And then you sit down and figure it out together, which is like super awesome because you're not figuring it out yourself, which is great.
I think the hardest is you have to force yourself to be flexible. And you can't be like precious with your ideas because you have to compromise.
Yeah.
And that can be hard as a writer, to hear like what you're saying is not going to work, or, that somebody disagrees with you. And so you kind of have to put your ego aside a little bit. I also think, and Kathleen and I did not do this at all, but we were just really lucky in that it's worked out very well. But it does matter, like the personalities, you have to find somebody whose personality meshes with yours and like you can communicate well with, and who isn't, it all depends on the 2 people or 3 people or however many people are writing, and making sure that you balance each other well.
Yeah. And I mean, you have to share that story. Like you are sharing a story. It's not just yours. You have to be flexible and be able to say, oh, wait a minute, that person is actually right. Like we need to do this and that has to happen. And you have to set your boundaries too. Like how fast are you going to write, or how slow are you going to write, or when are the chapters going to come? And Liz and I were really lucky that I think that our realistic fiction, we have similar styles. And so we just meshed in terms of personality as well, because we're both very kind of anxious and dark humored. And so that was helpful when we were writing. And it's a joy to co-write too, because you're a co-writer in terms of the way that Liz and I did it, trading chapters and dual POV. We'll send you a chapter and you're like, damn, I gotta up my game in the next chapter here, because there's some like smashing stuff happening, like prose style. So, it really like gets you out of your easy chair and gets you going. And creatively, you're like, oh damn, look what Liz did. I gotta work a little harder here. So that's really, it's really nice. I like it.
I do too.
It's much less lonely than writing by yourself, and it's fun. It's fun for us because it's not what we usually write, although our characters kind of go in that direction, but it's fun and we like it. But if you're going to do it, find the right person and make sure you have boundaries. And also the good thing was we both have kids, so we can do things like text each other and say, somebody's vomiting in the living room, so I'm not going to be getting that chapter view. And the other person's like, totally get it, fine.
Yeah.
Understand.
Thank you, guys. I have another question, but this is for the whole floor. So what are some tips you have for aspiring writers to create some depth in the mystery, to not make the mystery so obvious?
I describe it as the sandwich of suspicion. So when I'm trying to think about how to throw people off the scent, I, for some ungodly reason, think of it as layering ingredients on a sandwich. And sometimes you have a surprise second cheese layer. So you're coming back around to suspecting theory number 2 after theory number 4. But for me, it's just a matter of creating plausible explanations that I could believe and making them feel both practically possible and like they could be a satisfying answer, and like the answer it looks like that I as the author might be writing towards. Because when experienced mystery writers are reading a mystery, there's a lot of sort of meta work going on with on TV, it's I recognize that actor, so I bet he did it. So you have to balance what the reader is experiencing as like, I am reading a mystery book, as well as being immersed in the story, and to try to not let your cues in the story give it away on the genre level. without just becoming a stew of like, well, I'm going to do this because it's unexpected, not because it's what the story needs. And so just trying to balance all of those things. And for some reason, for me, it's a sandwich.
So my top tip would probably be, if you're going to do something that you think readers are going to expect, do it in an unexpected time. So if there's going to be something you think a good number of people are going to see coming, but they think it's going to happen at the end of the book, you put it at the midpoint of the book and suddenly no one knows what the heck is going to happen next. Similarly, readers will have the expectation that big twists are going to be paced out a certain amount from each other. Like, we had a twist, and then you go for many chapters until you get the next twist. So that means the unexpected time rule says big twist. Maybe sometimes it goes big twist again right away. Then you go. So it is like it's kind of what Kate was saying, because part of what they're doing is they're mind reading the author to figure out what they're doing. And so you have to read what they're thinking, you're thinking. So it's what we call second or third order theory of mind in psychology terms. But the timing of it, I think, helps a lot, because then, in a good mystery, if there's like 10 things that you want them to guess some of them, right? Because you want there to be some of the clues so that they can guess some of them. But if you're doubling them up, then they'll guess part of it, but then the next twist takes them by surprise. I think the second part to that is also, it's not just a whodunit, it's why they did it. So if someone guesses who, but they don't guess why, they haven't guessed the entire ending. So thinking of the question of the mystery as being multidimensional gives you a lot of different areas in which you can surprise people, while also giving them areas in which you're hoping they actually will figure some of this stuff out.
Yeah. I think one of the things that, I think about, and it's actually something that I kind of picked up from, because I did a lot of Agatha Christie research when I was writing the Alice parts, particularly in book 1, because they kind of used a lot of her methods in the book to try to solve this mystery. And one of the things that she did, which I think is very smart, is if you're going to have a truth, if you're going to have a real clue in there, you put it in a scene with a lot of red herrings. So it's kind of buried. So the reader is not like, might not pick up on it as easily as they would otherwise. And also something that Kathleen and I have talked about a lot is like, I think because we write very character-driven mysteries, that if you do guess who did it, the joy of reading the characters should still, bring you through to the end and make it an enjoyable journey, even if you're like, I'm pretty sure I'm right, because like the character voice is what, to me at least, matters most in a book. That's the thing that I get attached to. It's not so much like the plot or, and I guess I just read from a character point of view. So
I think you and I were in agreement that that if someone figured it out, that part of the fun of reading the book would be watching Alice and Iris figure it out.
Exactly.
As they went along. So
I think that can create a lot of tension too, when the reader knows what's going on and they can see things like the danger that the characters are in that they haven't realized yet.
Yeah, that is very true.
Yeah. All right. So are we all finished with our thoughts on this question? Mm-hmm. All right. So I'm going to close for us. So thank you all so much for joining us. Up next, we have The Forest for Trees, Climate Change and Fiction at 4:00. Thank you to the Salem Athenaeum, to all of our sponsors. Final thanks to you, our audience members. You can purchase our authors' books at our sponsor, Wicked Good Books here in Salem, Copper Dog Books in Beverly, or from your favorite bookstore. Our festival is free for everyone each year and is possible due to your support, so thank you. If you want to donate to the festival, please head to salemlitfest.org and click donate. So please check out the rest of our authors at salemlitfest.org and enjoy the Lit Fest. Thank you.
thank you. Bye.
Thank you.